feedlot. This is an interesting but confusing case. So what happened was, this company was run by a veterinarian who was doing studies on cattle, and he had to test different drugs and foods and different things, variables that he was using on the cattle. And he had to look at a sample size of 7,000 cattle that were someone else's cattle. So he paid the company that owned the cattle to study their cattle, paid him roughly $1.6 or $1.7 million over the period and claimed it all as SR&ED. And CRA took a couple of different positions saying, well, what is it? Is it a payment to a contractor? Is it an overhead expense? Are we leasing equipment? Are the cattle equipment there? Like, what is it? Is that what kind of expense is that? It's not salary and wages. We're not hiring it's got to fit in one of our categories. So where does that fit? So this is really interesting because it applies to all life sciences, whether we're studying cattle or mice or people. I mean, this is a really interesting problem. What if I pay patients to do tests on them? What is that? I see this issue all the time. I'm always wondering, like, what do I do with this? How do I disclose it? So disputed amounts, $1.6, $1.7 million. They were claimed as materials consumed originally based on the fact that they said, well, they were related to, more or less the cost of the food and the drugs and whatever. But then when they pushed that further, they found that they weren't really correlated to that they were quite a bit different, roughly only half. So that didn't explain it. So then we're like, well, what are these costs? Are they eligible? Are they ineligible? And if they're eligible, are they materials? What are they? What type of expense is it? Okay, so they talk about whether we go proxy or non-proxy. They go into legislation or an analysis of it. So the judge asks, is it a lease of equipment? Is it a payment to a subcontract? The owner of the cows? Is it materials transformed? Or is it actually commercial use of a process and not eligible? Okay, so the first thing they said is it is SR&ED from a technology point. We just don't know what kind of cost it is, since it was necessary data collection in order to answer the questions. Okay? Data collection commensurate with the needs of the project, necessary to answer the questions or technological uncertainties. Okay? They actually talks about it as testing. So really that this was a kind of testing that they had to use, and it was eligible ultimately as a subcontractor expense. Okay? So they claimed it as materials. They didn't get it as materials, but they did get it in as a subcontractor expense. I'm saying that my implications are, whether you're testing human beings for new drugs or animals for new drugs or any living organism, basically, and you're paying money to do that, this would be an important case on exactly the question. I don't know if any direction on what kind of expenses that would be, so the judge says it's a contractor expense. Okay? She also made a, sorry, go ahead.
No difference in treating from financial standpoint.
The credits are the same, whether you call it one or the other. The real question is it eligible? And then under the law, if it's eligible, it's still got to follow into one category. So if you don't fall in any of them, the real risk is it's an eligible expense, but it doesn't mean it's eligible from a scientific perspective, but it's not one of the types of qualified expenses, so it goes nowhere. This gives us some precedence that it would be a subcontractor expense. Yes, sir.
Cases where CRA would allow to claim material for the work performed by electricians, to claim them as material, even though it was done by humans and doing stuff.
So the comment is, we've seen claims where an electrician or a welder comes in and you can claim the materials, but they deny the welding costs or the electrical costs because they have a CRA administrative policy saying that they should do that, right? But that's not really founded in law anywhere. The CRA kind of just made that rule up as far as I'm aware. Yes, Ramsey?
If the cattle were considered capital,
yes.
would that not be then not allowed?
It would be allowed at the time, but now after 2014, since capital is no longer, so for this case, it would have been okay, but it would be a different level of credit. the credits on capital, if it's a CCP, so it's still 35%, but it's only 40% refundable, right? So, and the provincial credits are only 4% instead of 10% on capital and
Like
inter.
going forward, like say like if the cattle is considered the capital of the subcontractor, is that now, we have an issue there? Like,
Well, that was the second one. This is the confusing part of this case, and I read it 5 times, and then I went in LinkedIn and read what other people said about it, and I could tell they were even more confused than I was, that the judge actually comes on at the end and says that this is commercial production, right? And she said that, and I don't want to second guess the judge, but I think she's wrong. It's not commercial production. She's saying because the cattle were ultimately sold. And there's another great case like this called the Waxman case, dealing with cattle where Waxman won maybe 10 years ago. Very similar scenarios, where they treated him as a capital asset. The real issue here is that I believe, on looking at the law, the difference between experimental and commercial production is very, very easy. It's clearly objective. Okay? If I needed to do the work to resolve a pre-stated technological uncertainty that still exists, and I needed to do that work, it's eligible. If I didn't, it's commercial, if I'm selling it. If I'm selling it, but I needed to do the work in order to resolve the uncertainty, it's still eligible. I'm never going to get my labor cost back. Okay? The materials that form part of that product are a different story. The materials have to be consumed entirely in there. So if I build a prototype, I'm not getting any of my labor back. It's not like my staff are going to come and work for free for a month because I sold this, right? I have to pay them, I'm never getting that money back. But the materials are a different criteria. There's a case called Consultex. The materials actually have to be consumed, rendered completely valueless. And if I sell them, they weren't consumed in the R&D. I sold them. They were consumed by the consumer in a commercial process at the end of the day. They were used in the R&D, but they were ultimately consumed commercially. They weren't consumed in the R&D. So again, it's very clear. So that would be the correct way to do it. The subcontractor of, if you got a welding expense that the welders are, this is a CRA administrative policy that came out of somewhere. There's nothing in the law anywhere that says welding can't be a supporting activity. Someone at CRA created a law, okay? They don't have the ability to do it, but they did it, or they think they did it, and it's not supportable. If you go to court, the judge is going to say, where in the law, in the act, anywhere does it say welding, you know, if welding was not allowed, the act would say welding's not allowed. Then it would not be allowed. But again, the trick about a lot of this is just knowing what the law is and when to stand up for your rights. I mean, and sadly, more and more, that's happening all the time. It used to be, if you had a contentious issue, they would go to Ottawa and get an answer. Now when I talk to the district heads, they say there is no Ottawa. It's 2 years before Ottawa gives us a response on anything. We're an island here. We make our own rules and we have to just live with it. So I have to ask, what are the rules in Hamilton? What are the rules in Toronto? What are the rules in... They're not the same rules. I can tell you what the rules are. The rules are totally different depending on what district you're in. And that's not acceptable because the law is the same. It's the same legislation we're following, but the interpretation is radically different from district to district, and it's becoming more so, and there's no general control anywhere. I'm telling you, it's really just falling apart. This is evidence of how bad things are.